The following program is a Town of Colony television production of the William K. Sanford Town Library.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning round again, the years keep rolling by.
Good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening. I'm Joe Doolittle, and this is Story by Story.
Celebrating the human spirit. I'm Kate Dudding.
And we are storytellers. And we're with you once again to talk a little bit about the art of storytelling, storytelling as a method of communication and teaching and learning, and yes, entertaining. Mm-hmm. Yep, we're representatives of a group of storytellers locally called the Story Circle of the Capital District.
Yes, and also the Interfaith Story Circle of the Tri-City area. That's
right. And there are all sorts of websites which we'll give you as we go through the show here. Well, Kate, you know, I'm just feeling very good about the art of storytelling in the Capital District. I've been part of some really interesting programs. How about you? How are you feeling about storytelling today?
I think storytelling is very important. I just read I read about a TED Talk on communication by a professor at Princeton, and his research shows that when someone is telling a story, the brain waves that are happening in the storyteller start happening in the listeners.
You mean they get transferred?
Yes.
Cool.
Yes. We're not talking just about the receptive areas, the, hearing, but the understanding parts.
So we're talking about really sharing a story, sharing, learning, and the message. Wow.
Right. And what's even scarier, though, if you say, this is a story about a woman who was abused, or if you preface the same story by saying, this is a story about a woman who was heroic in a difficult situation, it puts a different slant on what people are receiving.
Wow. So the idea of framing the story is really important then.
Well, it's framing, yes. Yeah, but it's... They actually, in the article, they mentioned that certain news organizations could be he didn't use the term brainwashing, but the article, I thought, got very close to it. So...
well, and we know if we hear a story, we tend to remember it. I mean, all the biblical stories were transmitted orally before they were written down, and people then and now remember the story of Jacob and the river and fighting with God and those kinds of things. So you remember the stories.
And the stained glass was created in medieval times to remind people of the stories.
So one of the things we're acutely aware of is that there's more to story than perhaps just the story, and there's more to becoming a storyteller. Although we think it's interesting that a lot of people are storytellers and may not know it. So it's why we operate a few things for folks who are interested in learning more about storytelling, because we have some sessions every month, and they're on our website at storycircle@proctors.org. But folks can just come in and either listen or tell a story for the first time, and if they want some feedback, we give them feedback. But if you don't want any feedback, you just tell. And the other thing that happens around the area, both in Schenectady at Arthur's Market and up at Cafe Lena in Saratoga, are open mics, and they're times when people can come in and sign up and tell their story on a stage and get some affirmations, but experience the art of storytelling.
Speaking to publicly is one of most people's greatest fears, dying, losing your job, moving, and maybe just a couple down from there is public speaking. And for myself, it was the last thing in the world I wanted to do. But I got to a point 20 years ago where I found stories I felt I had to share. And storytelling is not about the storyteller in the same way as opera focuses on the opera singers. In an opera audience, I believe people know, oh, is the soprano going to hit the E flat or whatever it is? Storytelling audiences are totally different because they don't know what's coming, number one. And the story engages them, that the storyteller is looking at the listeners. We're all on this adventure together. It's an extraordinary personal art form, I feel.
The other noteworthy item about storytelling, I find, is the sense of community that gets built around telling, whether it's around your kitchen table in a family situation, an open mic, a performance. And again, that's kind of generative. I think when people arrive for a storytelling program, they may not expect that connection with the teller or the other listeners. Maybe it's those brainwaves getting transferred around, but it's real. And certainly a recent experience where we have a program at the Irish American Heritage Museum, and we had two tellers, Claire Beadlestone and Lee Ellen Marvin. And Lee Ellen Marvin did about a 40-minute set about an immigrant woman, and Anne, who was the first person to register in at Ellis Island.
Oh.
And it was just a wonderful, moving tribute to the immigrant experience. And then it was followed by a set of all the Irish myths that Claire Beadlestone told, the Finn McCool and all the, and the complement of the respective journeys of the featured character and the featured teller was really just wonderful. And it's hard to describe, but it all worked. And I compliment those two tellers, and we'll be back with that series in the fall down at the Irish American Heritage Museum. But it was one of those real community builders in a way that brought history together and made it contemporary. I don't know how to say.
But I bet when people heard Lee Ellen's story about that immigrant, they thought back to their family stories of immigration. And like my grandfather came through Ellis Island as a 2-year-old with his mother and some of his older siblings. And they got the last train out of New York City before the blizzard of 1888.
Wow. Now that's part of the story right there. How did you arrive in the United States just before the blizzard?
And that was a killing blizzard. 40-some inches fell in this area. Trains were stuck and cattle died on it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, it was a real
It sounds like it could
disaster.
be yesterday or tomorrow around here, the way spring is holding on to be so late. Our normal format is that we have some guest tellers who are going to talk about their experience as a storyteller and share a story. Now, our guests will have to come another time because they got ill just before the show, so we don't have any guests. So one of the guests is Kate Dudding.
And the other guest is Joe Doolittle.
There you go. So, Kate, I want to just have you share with us a little bit. You discovered you were a storyteller 20 years ago. And how did that happen? How did you discover that you were a storyteller?
Well, there were two forces that were coming together to make a critical mass. One was that I was taking my young son to enriching activities.
Yes.
And some of them were storytelling events at the New York State Museum. I had never heard of storytelling before, so, but I had always loved theater. And then if I was ever with a group of children, I've always found it was better to harness their energy than to let them start bouncing off the walls.
Right.
Or running. So if I had a group that I needed to monitor, I would, out of desperation, share a story I had heard. And I did that at when my son was in 4th grade and up at Camp Chinjacook, when each cabin had to do an activity, and I recommended it to my cabin. Well, I know a story about an Iroquois story of Bear bragging about his long bushy tail, because long ago, when animals could still speak, Bear had a great big bushy tail. And I said, all of you can be one of the animals he brags to. And when you'll sit in a line, and I'll come up to you and say, and then Bear saw, and you could say squirrel or robin or whatever, and then we'll just chat, and I'll be saying how much better my tail was than yours, and then I'll go on to the next animal. And they said, sure. And when we did that, the room was quiet. There were 150 people there, 100 of them 4th graders. And I went, this is magical, and I want to be part of it. That was one theme. The other theme was that my parents died when I was in my 30s, and my best friend was killed in an automobile accident when I was 43. This Camp Chinjacook happened when I was 45. And for my son, my father died before he was even born. And I knew that he would only know of them through stories. So this deeply personal need to keep these people in my life, and this experience of magical sharing, all came together. And I asked Lois Hodges, whom I knew through the recorder group, I want to do this. What do I do? And she said, well, Janine Laverty gives wonderful workshops, weekend workshops up in the Adirondacks. You need to get a hold of her.
There you go. There you go. Wow. And that's the beginning.
That's the beginning. But I always enjoyed learning and then sharing it. And so I remember in 4th grade learning something, and then I was anxious to be up in front of my class and sharing it. Doing presentations for work on my project, it was something I had to do. But
one of the things that's impressed me about your storytelling work is that you've actually made a point to collect stories around certain topics. And I know that you did a scope of work with your father's infantry unit, and brought his pictures back and really harvested the pictures and let the survivors share some of their stories around those pictures. And you've got a real theme going on, people who've made a difference. And you did another one I can remember about women in World War II. Were you?
Yes, I interviewed 7 people who lived during World War II, 4 veterans, 2 women on the home front, and a fellow who was a kid in Brooklyn, the Bronx.
One of those places.
Greater New York City.
So when you're putting together an idea, or whether you're getting curious about something, how does it work that you find yourself in that harvest mode of really seeking out a cluster of stories around a topic?
A cluster of stories. Usually it's backwards.
It's backwards?
It's backwards. Usually I find, like the last CD I did, Fighting for Our Rights, American Women Mid-20th Century. That includes women involved in the civil rights movement and the women's rights movement. So I had collected some stories on both sides of that, and so I realized they were happening in the 50s and 60s. Okay. And then I was able to see Fighting for Our Rights was what both groups were doing, and I just tried to I probably filled in a gap.
Yeah.
A gap or two with, okay, well, I don't have a story about a woman in this kind of situation. But it's usually, well, what stories have I tripped over,
Right.
and how can I connect them? My first CD was on lighthouses and their keepers.
It's hard to trip over a lighthouse.
Well, no, actually, and that started by I had gotten a book at a National Seashore Museum in Michigan. Michigan has the most number of lighthouses of any state in the country.
Michigan.
Because it has so much shoreline on the Great Lakes.
Wow.
Both the Lower Peninsula, and then has Lake Huron, Lake Michigan, and then this has Michigan and Lake Superior.
Wow.
So it's not Florida, it's not Alaska, it's not Hawaii, it's not Maine. Those were my guesses. But Michigan isn't. So that had stories of women lighthouse keepers. And then they talked about Fresnel, who created the lenses, and they moved the lighthouse at Cape Hatteras.
That's right. I remember seeing the pictures of that.
Yes. So it's I trip over them.
So you collect your stories.
And then I notice I have a critical mass.
But you collect your stories backwards. I love that line. Yeah, I love that line.
Yes, that. Yeah.
Now we've talked around story a bit. Do you have a story you'd like to share that we can kind of experience?
Yes, indeed I do. It's one of my personal stories, and I call it My Mother's Piano. It started in August of 1955. My mother was experiencing hay fever, awful. Her nose was running, her eyes were itching, even though she got allergy shots. She was in a world of her misery. My father came home for lunch every day. He worked half a mile from the house. So my father noticed that she was not a happy camper. He said, "Seal, why don't you go shopping?" Now, I believe he was thinking hat. In 1955, ladies wore hats to church and to special occasions and funeral parlors, and I don't think they wore them to grocery stores. But if you were going into a very nice department store, I think the hat would have, and gloves would have come into mind. My father was thinking hat. My mother, who had grown up with a piano in her house and had taken piano lessons, was thinking the August piano sale at Baldwin Piano Store, that they had a Tanglewood sale every year, that they sold pianos that had been used in the music classes at Tanglewood, not so far from here, and they also sold that current season's models at a discount. And so that's how my mother got her piano. It was a spinet, which is the shortest piano that you can get. So it wasn't a rich sounding piano, but it was a piano anyway. And I liked it because when I started taking piano lessons 3 years later, it didn't say Baldwin on it. It said Acusonic, and the C in Acusonic was right on top of middle C. And so
Who'd have thunk?
Who'd have thunk? And so that helped me learn the pattern of the keys, because I always could find middle C, and then, okay, the same pattern of the black and the white notes. Okay, there's the C above that. There's this. And from those landmarks, I could navigate everywhere. Now, I remember my first piano book. And I remember one of my first pieces, da 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 da. Now that didn't sound like much, but they also included in little bitty notes a duet part for the teacher, or in my case, for my mother. So she would sit on this side of me and play all the chords, and we sounded great together. I remember that. That was much better than just what I could manage to do. Well, we continued playing duets. That when I advanced to using both hands at the same time, my mother got a wonderful book, and one of our favorites was a song from the opera Hansel and Gretel and I love the composer's name, and this was before a singer in England had adopted the name, Engelbert Humperdinck. I just loved that name, Engelbert Humperdinck. And it was the evening prayer. Da 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 da. That was my solo. In the more advanced duet books, the lower part tended to be the simpler part, and the melody was the more advanced part. So my mother would now be sitting on my right side, and I would be sitting on the left playing the lower notes. And then we reached the pinnacle of our duet career. You undoubtedly remember the Ed Sullivan Show.
Right.
Sunday night, 8 o'clock, CBS. Everybody I knew watched the Ed Sullivan Show, Sunday night, 8 o'clock, CBS, especially when the Beatles made their debut there. But he had lots of other kinds of acts, music, entertainment acts on, and one of them were Ferranti and Teicher. They were pianists. They had two grand pianos on stage facing each, so that the pianists could face each other. And they played these elaborate arrangements of classical music or popular music. And luckily for my mother and me, they published some easy adaptations of their work for four hands on the same piano. I remember we had the theme to Exodus.
Oof.
This land, my part again, is mine, God gave this land to me. It was majestic. We filled the house with that theme song. Now, my brother took piano lessons too. We each took 5 years, from 3rd grade to 8th grade. We didn't continue them into high school because our job in high school was to get good grades so we could get into a good college. And the piano lessons would have been a distraction from that, my parents felt. But we still, of course, had my mother's piano in the house, and my mother and I played duets. My brother, when the lessons stopped, he stopped too. But interestingly enough, after he was out of college, he bought himself a piano. It was one he could play with his feet, a player piano. So he wasn't playing with his hands anymore. He didn't have to read the music, but he had this player piano, and it was quite an aerobic activity, I found, especially when, I think it was the William Tell Overture. He had gotten some arrangement, and the piano roll almost looked like lace. There were so many holes in it, and it's the holes that drive the pneumatic mechanism of the player piano. And then when my husband and I moved into our first house, my husband bought me a piano. We moved in on Labor Day weekend, and so we were all set for the August sale at the Baldwin. We bought a school piano, a school upright. So the tallest upright you could get, and the bass strings are strung this way, so that they're longer than they normally would be. So we had our three pianos. My mother's piano in southern Connecticut, my brother's piano out in Michigan that he played with his feet, and my piano up here in Clifton Park. But then my parents died, and it was time to get rid of the things in the family house. most families go through this experience that the relatives take what they want, and then someone is in charge of selling that which can be sold and giving away, and then paying people to take away the rest. My aunts, who lived near where my parents lived, graciously said that they would handle the selling, giving away, and so forth. So after my brother and I took what we wanted and my aunts took what they wanted, my aunts set out on the mission of emptying the house so it could be sold. My Aunt Mary Lou said, when the movers came to take all the furniture that had been sold to a second-hand dealer, one of the movers said, "Oh, that piano isn't on the list. Are you going to sell the piano?" And my aunt said, "Oh, yes, but I haven't gotten an estimate on it yet." And the man said, "Oh, as soon as you get an estimate, please call me. My daughter loves to play the piano, but all we have right now is an electronic keyboard. Oh, I'm sure she'd love to have that piano. So here, take my number." And he found a piece of paper and he wrote his name and phone number on it and gave it to my aunt. So a few days later, my aunt got the estimate on what the piano was worth and called the man, and he said, "It's a deal. I'll stop at the bank at noontime today. At 5 o'clock, I'll be off work. I'll bring a truck and a friend, and I'll pay you the cash, and we'll take the piano." And my aunt was surprised, but pleasantly surprised, because this was a large burden to get out of the house. And she said he was right on time. He had the cash. He was smiling. The piano had little bitty wheels. It was a heavy son of a gun, but these were movers, so they had brought the equipment that they needed, and they were able to get it out and down the several steps in the front of the house and into the truck. But the story doesn't end there. My aunt got a phone call that night from that man. And he said, "I wanted to thank you. My daughter loves her piano." And when my aunt told me this story, she said, "I could hear his daughter playing the piano in the background. And she finished a piece, and then she just laughed out of sheer joy." My aunt and I talked about this a little bit. We decided that she indeed had found a good home for my mother's piano.
Oh, Kate, it was just wonderful. Just wonderful. I took piano lessons. Anybody out there who was listening probably realized that they've been there. Mm-hmm. Not so much, I didn't play duets with anybody, but just the whole act of expressing yourself mm-hmm. musically in a way that was coherent was a big deal. Mm-hmm. And then to have that relationship with your mother, mm-hmm. and then to have it carry on and hear the laughters of joy in mm-hmm. the background on the phone. What a great story. What a great story.
Because we had felt badly that nobody wanted the piano. But, we had ours, and my aunts were at the age where they were getting rid of things, not collecting things. It's certainly not as bulky and awkward as a piano.
Now, how did you back into that story?
How did I back into that story? I have a story about my mother's hands,
right.
which you've heard, and it has a little piano part in it.
Yep.
And when I was telling it one day, I started expanding that, but it really went beyond the scope of the story of my mother's hands, and I realized that's a separate story, all of its own. And so then I realized it started with the duet part. And then I remembered the funny story of go shopping, Seal, because my mother told that a lot. And then I remembered the good home for it.
And the player piano, that was
yeah, I was really surprised that he kept it for a number of years.
Yeah, fun.
And I had heard of it, I had seen it on movies, but I had never done that until he bought his.
Well, thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for that.
And so personal stories to me are important because, as you said, they're generative. That you remembered something from your background, and I hope other people will recognize that if they've had to take apart a family home, that the possessions are spread out, but they've found a good home, and they're appreciated where they are. And it might be a slight guidance to people who have yet to go through that experience. So that's why I share. My family I think of them as the Cleavers of Connecticut. That's what I said. Beaver, the Beaver, leave room. What make room for Beaver? What was that?
Leave it to Beaver.
Leave it to Beaver. Yes, yes. And my mother did not wear pearls while she did the house cleaning or cooking, but. Not exceptional, exceptional. Middle class. The house was bought with a GI mortgage. My father got his associate's degree because of the GI Bill of Rights.
Yep.
No Pulitzer Prize winners.
Nothing like that.
No outstanding athletes. Nothing.
Just good stories.
Good solid people.
Good solid people. Well, we're coming on to summer.
And we're halfway through the show. So do we want to do the coming events?
I think we should.
And then I'd like to talk to you about something. Yeah,
yep, okay.
You'll find out. Okay, so on June 7th, First Tuesday's Tales and Stuff at Arthur's Market in the middle of the Stockade in Schenectady. The featured teller will be Reggie Harris, and he'll be sharing stories and songs for racial healing. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about what racial healing is.
For those who've watched the show, about 2 or 3 months ago, we had Sandy Powell here, who was
and Barbara
Spring, who were members of the Albany Society of Friends, and the Quakers have started a wonderful program called Stories for Racial Healing, which includes a potluck and a round robin of story sharing about the elements of race in our lives. And race is a very complex issue. We tend to, historically, if you look at the timeline, we tend to do it over. Starting with slavery and the abolitionist movement and the Civil War and Reconstruction. As a society, I think we practice a little bit of recidivism. And whatever progress we make in formally doing some things about racism, we tend to have those things kind of slip away, and we find ourselves in the same situation. Mm-hmm. And this is a gathering that's really built around the premise that storytelling can help build understanding about some of those issues. And we weave some very interesting books that are contemporary. Waking Up White is one I identify with because it's the story really of white privilege, and it involves some of the ironies of the GI Bill. The black vets didn't get the same access to the GI Bill that the white vets did, and kind of the presumptions of things that are, in some regards, so subtle and ingrained into our society that we miss them unless we're not white. So I've been impressed with the method, and I've been impressed by the stories.
Could you share one nugget of a story?
Well, I can tell one. Sandy and I did a program for the Schenectady Intercity Ministry, which has come on as a co-sponsor of the series. And Sandy told a story of being in the 2nd grade in Baltimore. And she came home, and her mother was working, so her grandmother raised her and got her lunch and stuff. So she asked her grandma if she could bring her friend Lucy home for lunch. And why, sure, you can bring your friend home for lunch. So 2 days later, Lucy came home for lunch, and Lucy was white. And Grandma just froze at the door and was very bitter, distant. And as Sandy went back to school, she says, "You're going to get a whooping when you get home." And when she got home, after trying to figure out what she'd done, she did get a whooping, and her grandmother said, "You're not going to bring any white trash into this house again." And she didn't know that her friend Lucy was white. And so her mother and her grandmother talked through, and it was the first time as a second grader that she understood what her grandmother had been through in her upbringing in South Carolina, and how she really felt. And her mother said she'd never get over it. So she had to give her grandmother some space in this issue, yet she'd done the right thing by bringing Lucy home and being Lucy's friend. And so she described the conflict of things. And I found it a very powerful story because it's pretty basic stuff that you have to learn that you're of a different race.
You've got to be carefully taught.
You got to be, and that even on the cusp of what the grandmother would have taught her, that her mother kind of intervened a little bit and softened the message and made the message different. But certainly Sandy understands her heritage.
I have a story that I've never forgotten. It wasn't called racial healing, it was diversity training at GE. And one of the leaders of my class was an African American glassblower from GE's Research Center, now Global Research. And I had heard, I didn't have any need as a software person to have any glass blown, but I had heard of him because he'd been in our company newspaper because he was an athlete that had participated in the Empire Games. So Larry told the story of, he said, "I'll never forget this. I was on vacation in New Hampshire, on the coast of New Hampshire, a tourist area. And as I was going into one of the tourist shops, a woman was coming out and said, 'Oh, I'll be right back.' And I walked in and I realized I was all alone in this store and that she must have been in charge of the store. And I couldn't believe it. She left me alone in this store. In Schenectady, I am followed around in stores because they assume I'm going to steal something.
Yeah.
But there, she just trusted me. And it was like, oh my God, when I heard that, I've never had that experience. And he has it all the time.
Yeah. What
a burden that must be. What, to always, they're wrong, I'm a worthy person, I can't let this gnaw at me.
Well, it's a great story, and the kinds of things that happen. We were talking about community building and things. At one of the racial healing stories is we've been successful in getting black and whites together around the table. We don't try to get anything beyond a little deeper understanding. Although there's another group that's working to kind of dialogue deeper on focusing on some action, and that's kind of been good to see in Schenectady. And they're looking at some bigger issues. There's this whole issue of the difference in incarceration rates between blacks and whites. There's the whole segmentation or stratification that's happened in city schools. And Schenectady's pretty aware of that and taking on some of those things. So So this is really, I think, an area of having a conversation that I think as a society we should have. I think there's some interest in faith-based communities helping spread it. So if anybody else out there wants to host a program, they can contact me through our webpage or at aldenjoe@nicap.rr.com because we'd love to have that. And we often have a featured teller, and I need to talk a little bit about Reggie Harris because Reggie and his wife Kim are renowned in, well, actually nationally and internationally. They live in Schoharie. They've been folk singers and educators for their entire career, and they put forth the message of life beyond diversity, of the wholeness and the richness of cultural heritage. And I got an email from Reggie. I'm blessed to have known them both. Kim just received her PhD from Union Theological Seminary and did chaplain training with Harlan Ratmeyer and LB Med. So Reggie said, I got a copy of this note. I'd love to help. And so we got to talking. I said, one of the ways you can help is you just come up and do. And he said, great, I'm working on a really interesting project for the Civil War Trust. And the Civil War Trust is the not-for-profit that kind of goes along with the battlegrounds.
Okay.
And he's done stories and songs of both sides of his family tree on the plantation. And he's only kind of described it briefly, but so he's going to do about a half an hour, and we'll weave our other stories around Reggie, where he'll do a little bit of a rehearsal for that other presentation in July, and he's wonderful. He looks like his picture. He's just effervescent in the way he goes in life.
He looks very warm and welcoming. I've never had the pleasure of meeting him.
And he's talented, and he's got that great baritone voice with a big range. So it's wonderful. Wonderful. So if you're around on June 7th, that would be fun to have you visit us at Arthur's. You can park just around the corner in the First Reformed Church parking lot because parking can be a little tricky down there. But come on out, and it's wholesome, and it's wonderful, and it's going to be fun.
Great. Then, as you mentioned, there's a storytelling open mic up in Saratoga, which is the next night.
Right.
Because the first Monday in June is followed by the second, the first Tuesday in June is followed by the second Wednesday in June, June 7th and June 8th. Wait, how could they be back to back? Oh, right, it's not usual, but we alternate between Wesley Commons, the Wesley community just west of Skidmore campus. It's free when we hold it there. Every other month we hold it at Cafe Lena, where there's a modest price. You can find out directions on our website if you're so inclined. Then our Story Circle meeting, which you also alluded to earlier, in June will be at the Pine Hills Library in Albany on June 15th, Wednesday in June will be determined. The slide now has it correct. And we'll have a little learning session at 6:15, and then at 7 to 9 we'll be sharing stories under development, only telling, no reading. You could have an outline that you glance down to, but this is not a writer's group where you're reading the whole story. But we welcome listeners. We welcome listeners very, very sincerely. Then at the end of that week, down in Saugerties, is Storytelling with Janet Carter at the Inquiring Minds Bookstore. The third Friday of every month at 7 o'clock.
And the Inquiring Minds Bookstore is just a wonderful place to, 1, hang out, 2, listen to stories, and 3, to tell stories. It's just a charming environment, and I commend it to you if you're living down that way where you can easily get to Saugerties. It's a great thing.
It's only about an hour from Clifton Park, so if you're Albany or further south, it's much even more closer.
Even more closer.
Now, the Interfaith Story Circle of the Tri-City area is having an event in June, but the details have not been finalized. So you can check their website, interfaithstory.org/Tri-City, to find out information about their June meeting. And if you find that there's absolutely nothing to watch on television, which might happen, who knows, you can go to our website, storycircle@proctors.org, and click on YouTube, where we have over 170 stories on demand for your enjoyment. Now, that's what I know about June. You have anything up your sleeve?
I don't have anything up my sleeve. I have a couple of preaching opportunities over the summer. I'm going to be preaching on the 26th of June at the Unitarian Universalist Church in Saratoga, which will be fun. And they asked me, I had to give them a title already.
Okay, right, yeah.
So it's going to be on coincidence.
Okay.
And I have one of the coincidences in my life is I have a very good friend who goes to this church in Saratoga, whose birthday is June 27th, just like mine. So we're conspiring that after the worship service, we're going to have a shared luncheon, bruncheon party in Saratoga for our respective birthdays.
On your birthday eve.
Yes. So that's one of the coincidences that our birthdays are the same. So, but that's about the only thing up my sleeve at the moment.
Yeah.
I would like to talk a little bit about just another aspect of our abolitionist history or our racial history. Our church, the First Reformed Church
Of Schenectady,
is a partner with the Duryea African Methodist Episcopal Church up on Hamilton Hill on Hewlett Street. And the church is named after a member of our church who helped organize that congregation in 1837 when he was a Union College student. And he went off into ministry, practiced ministry elsewhere, came back and started the Second Reformed Church in Schenectady, went to war as a chaplain and passed away of his illnesses in the war. And the congregation named the church after him about 15 years later. Mm-hmm. So we've maintained a relationship, and the denomination, the AME Zion denominations, was inherited the Harriet Tubman homestead in Auburn, New York. And the story behind Harriet Tubman, who you know is the Go Down Moses and the Underground Railroad and the woman's suffragette, quite a person. She was given a spot of land and a house by William Seward, and she subsequently bought it right away because she didn't want the gift. But she and William Seward were allies in the abolitionist movement and other things.
So Seward's folly buying...
Seward was the Secretary of State with Lincoln and the candidate who didn't get the nomination and all that stuff. And he and his wife played a fairly significant role in the Underground Railroad. He was also a Union College graduate, by the way.
I am too.
There you go. So the denomination supports the homestead and museum, and they have a fundraiser festival every year, which we did just this past weekend. And our choir participated along with several other community choirs, and it was a wonderfully vibrant service.
And you're a member of
I'm a member of the choir. And what impressed me was the nature of the heritage. And, you know, we often think about African Americans as being challenged in a family structure. But there was a young 7-year-old boy who was being nominated to be a Tubman candidate to go to camp at the Tubman homestead, who was a direct descendant of Harriet Tubman's brother. And, you know, you listen to the family tree the way any of us would listen to the family tree, and it was pretty powerful connections. And we had a wonderful time musically. And through all of that music, not all, you know, old spirituals, but contemporary gospel and contemporary, just a range of really deep talent. It was uplifting. And if ever we can make lemonade out of something like slavery and racism, let it be a wonder to the love of however the Spirit moves in our lives or however the democracy of our nation carries us. Because at least on Saturday night in Hamilton Hill, things were alive and well in the world of people being together about important issues and understanding what the love of life and God was. So it's kind of a really neat experience. So I share that with you, not so much as a story, but just how wonderful it is to be able to carry the courage of a Harriet Tubman forward. And then she gets placed on the $20 bill.
Yes.
You know, she never ran for office, but she won that online election of being placed on the $20 bill. And I think it's going to be good to have her carry forward as a role model and as a story for this next generation. So we were all pleased with that.
Yes, because she's not only a role model for the African American community, obviously she is, but for women,
right,
that facing adversity, and she had her missions and she did it. She put her life on the line to do it. Not many of us have to do that. And just anyone facing adversity. I have another little story.
Well,
it's an adaptation of a story, and my adaptation goes like this. The daughter woke up that summer morning, and she was surprised. She was trying to figure out what was different. She said, it's not hot anymore. When I went to bed, it was so hot, and now it isn't. There was the storm. I remember the storm woke me up during the night, but the storm brought in the cool air. That's why I'm underneath my sheet and my blanket now. The storm. Oh, you see, the daughter and her mother lived in a house by the shore. And so the daughter ran into her mother's bedroom and said, "Mommy, Mommy, Mommy, get up, get up. We have to go down to the beach to see what the storm brought us." Because the high waves from the storm always went way up on the beach, farther than the tide normally went, and would drop all kinds of things. She had on her shelf in her bedroom, stones and pieces of bottles that had been sanded by the sand, and some driftwood. And her mother, on the other hand, opened one eye and then the other and said, "What time is it?" "It's 6 o'clock. It's day." And in the summer, 6 o'clock is day. "Mommy, Mommy, we have to go to the beach to see what the storm brought us." And the mother took a deep breath, remembered her excitement as a child going to the beach after a storm, and remembering the shelf in her daughter's bedroom, and said, "Right, let's get up and have a quick breakfast and go right to the beach." And that's what they did. When they got to the beach, her daughter just slipped out of her flip-flops and said, I'll be catch up when you can, Mom," and ran up and over the sand dune and down. And the mother picked up the flip-flops and was knocking the sand out of them before she put them in her tote bag, when her daughter said, "Mommy, Mommy." And her mother just dropped everything and ran over the sand dune and said, "Look, Mommy, look." And there, above the high tide mark, were thousands of starfish that had gotten caught by the storm's waves and brought up. Now, starfish have legs. They have lots of legs, but they're only itty-bitty ones. And that was a long way for them to travel back to the water. But the daughter, after she got over the horror and surprise of seeing all of them, went over and picked up one and carried it down to the water and let it go, and went back again without a pause. And her mother said, "Sweetie, you're not going to be able to save all of them." "I know, Mommy, but I can save some." And her mother said, "Of course, we can save some." So she started joining in. She could take 2 at a time and bringing them down to the water. Now they stayed on that beach doing that all morning long. There were a lot of people who passed them. You know, people like to walk on the beach and walk their dogs. And almost everyone noticed them and stopped and said, "What are you doing?" And the little girl said, "We're saving the starfish." And they almost always said, "Well, you know, little girl, you won't be able to save all of them." "I know, but we can save some." As she scooped up yet another. Most of those people stopped and helped. Some for only a few minutes, but some for over an hour. And by the time it was high noon and the sun was so hot that it had killed the rest of the starfish, they had saved a surprising number of starfish. The mother and the daughter never forgot that day. And whenever they faced a seemingly impossible task, they got together as many people as they could, and then they did what they could.
Wow. Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Kate. That's, the power of a child. Yeah. And the love of a mom.
Yeah, so I extended the original story, and I'm sorry I can't remember the author's name, ended with the child saying, "But I can save this one."
Right.
But I think it went beyond that. Yeah. I think his fictional story, his characters, it would have gone beyond that,
yeah.
And I think that's what we all have to do. That. We can only hold up so much of the sky,
right.
Our section of the sky, and
we're all in this together.
Yeah,
that's true.
All the interfaith groups there, and the racial healing groups, right.
and well, we've spent an hour talking about the power of story, about the nature of generating good ideas from listening and from telling stories. And it's been kind of fun to be with you. We hope you've enjoyed it. And we hope we see you at some of the Story Circle events that are going to be happening over the summer.
And come back next month to hear about what's happening at Schoharie Crossing.
Right.
The big summer storytelling events in the greater capital region.
Right. And it's a wonderful place, and it's kind of a surprise because people don't always know it's there. So stay tuned. We hope to see you. Mm-hmm. And Kate, I'll never look at a piano quite the same again.
Thank you, Joe. And thank you for all you do in bringing groups together for storytelling.
My pleasure.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, but I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning round,